Hello, everybody. This is Laurie Meyer from stampedgreetings.com. I apologize if the camera is moving a little bit. I think I just bumped the table and it should stop moving very soon. Today, I want to show you how to make this absolutely, in my opinion, stunning card. And the star of the show is definitely the designer series paper. And we'll take a look at that in just a minute. There are a few elements that you need to prep for the card, and then putting it together, frankly, is not difficult at all. And I think as we go through and look at it, you'll find that you can adapt this to many different dies, stamps, designer series paper, and different occasions. But let me show you some of the products that I'm going to be using. I just want to point them out in the catalog. And I'm going to be confessing, and this is an embarrassing confession to make, and that is that when I got to these pages in the current catalog, 102 and 103, I'll be honest, I think I was a little overwhelmed with all the new stuff. And by this point, which is about a little more than halfway through, my brain was on overload. And the first couple times that I looked through, I didn't see this enough that I paid attention. Well, I paid attention because, especially for me, the designer series paper is absolutely stunning. It is called Masterfully Made. And I just want to show you this. I've been looking at some of the details of this paper, and I hope that the artist at Stampin' Up! Who put the paper together will do a video, maybe already has done a video, that we will be able to see, because what I've found is the more I look at this, the more it absolutely just enthralls me. This is a photograph of multiple pieces of paper that have been torn and purposely put in a position, a gorgeous design. And then the picture is taken and then it's redone into the designer series paper. So this is one example. But here's what I wanted to point out. Look at that design, that really pretty flower design. And I should have pulled out the paper. That's one of the papers in this package. So part of the paper that is in the package was used to make other parts of the paper that is in the package. It's crazy. And then there are beautiful, beautiful florals like this that are not photographed, but they are also snuck into pieces that are photographed. Like here's the piece that I'm showing you. Well, that snuck in right here. And these are, again, a picture, but they were all torn and then put together and a picture was taken. And it's just amazing. This is paper. This is paper that was torn, made into flowers, made into the leaves and all the foliage that you see in the back. I mean, I could go on, and I would go on and on. And I'm obsessed. I need an intervention. I have used this way too much, and I know I will continue. Today's project that I'm going to show you, I landed on this piece. And I'll show you how I cut it up, and I'm going to use that as the backdrop. But if you haven't looked at the designer series paper that comes with the suite for the items that are on page 102 and 103, I just encourage you to do that. I think you're going to find that they are really, really nice. And again, it's called the Masterfully Made Suite. Included in that is also this really nice bundle. There's a fun stamp set. I used this last week in a kind of a Stamp-A-Stack project that is posted out on YouTube. I'm just going to use one stamp this week on the project, that little hello. But in addition to the designer series paper, the big star of the card that I'll do today comes from the dies. And these are addictive. They are very, very unique. The one here gives you a really cool edge. It's what looks like a piece of note paper that might have been torn out of a spiral notebook. really cool, and it has that perforation as well. What's really nice about it is it's long, so you can easily do landscape or portrait. And then you have a neat little die that gives you a torn edge, and I'm going to be using that a lot as well. So I'm just going to get these dies out. And while we're at it, we're going to use the dies that are the foliage. So the only die I'm not using in the project this week is the one that fits around some of the sentiments. I did use that in last week's project. So we're going to be using these 4 and also some of the designer series paper. So let me just jump in. I'm going to show you the supplies, the primary supplies that I used to make this card. And there are not many. The card base that I chose is basic white. It's an A2 size. We all know that that means it's 8.5 by 5.5, scored at 4 1/4 on the 8.5 inch side. I used thick cardstock. And the reason was I've got a lot of layers on the front, and I just wanted it to be a little sturdy when it stands up. I do believe that regular cardstock would be fine. I just want it to be a little bit overly sensitive to that. So this is basic white, thick. Then we have a border in the back. And that is one of my absolute favorite colors that is coming back. I'm super excited that it's back. It is Pretty Peacock, and it is just a gorgeous, gorgeous kind of a blue-green. And it just makes me happy. It is absolutely beautiful. The size of this paper is 4 by 5 1/4. So it's just a little bit narrower and a little bit smaller in height from our card base. So again, it's 4 by 5 1/4. And I suggest that you get 2 sheets of that out, 2 of the 4 by 5 1/4, because one of them we're going to use to cut out a couple of the die cuts, and the other we're going to use as the frame. Okay, so we need those 2 pieces. And then we're going to use a piece of the designer series paper. This is cut to 4 inches square. And you will notice that when I cut that piece, let me bring back in the 12 by 12. I cut it from the bottom, meaning I brought it up 4 inches from the bottom and cut it over. What's nice about this size, being 4 by 4, is you can get 9 pieces out of one piece of 12 by 12. Now, depends on the design on the 12 by 12, because on this sheet, I would really get 6. I would get 3 on one end and 3 on the other. The middle I can use for something else. And I'll show you after we do this card that I actually used the back, and I made the same kind of card in a monochromatic fashion, which I think is really pretty as well. So 4 by 4 on the designer series paper. And then the last 2 pieces of paper that I used, I have a piece of fresh freesia. This is a returning color. It was an in color a couple of years ago. It is 1.5 inches wide, and it's in the background of my sentiment. I just wanted a little pop of color to pull out some of that fresh freesia that is in the designer series paper. And then my sentiment is going to be on a piece of scrap basic white that is 1.5 inches wide. I'm not going to say that they need to be a certain length, because you're going to see we're going to be trimming those. Okay, so those are the pieces of paper. So let's go ahead and we're just going to kind of dive in and start the card. The first thing we're going to do is a trick that I like, which conserves paper. I'm kind of frugal, and people who know me, I think, would agree that I am frugal. So what you can do is, if you have several die cuts that you are going to be making from a particular color or some of the cardstock that you're using for your card, you can sneak in some cuts and people will not know. Behind this designer series paper, I cut out this leaf, this foliage, and I placed my die, something like this, and I ran it through my die cutting machine. And through the magic of television, this is what I end up with. So I'm not wasting another piece of paper by cutting out the die that I'm going to be putting on top of that card. I have that piece already cut out. And what's really nice is the designer series paper is going to fit right over that hole and no one is going to be the wiser. So that's just a trick to keep in mind if you're using a big piece of paper and you want to get more out of that piece. You want to use it to its fullest. So I would suggest if you're using a large die and it's big enough or small enough maybe to fit behind that piece of designer series paper, go ahead and cut that out of your frame. All right, so that's one thing that we're going to prep. I'm going to show you how to prep this, and then we're going to put it together. I mentioned that it would be a really good idea to have another piece of your cardstock available in addition to the one that I just cut for the frame. And the reason is, for the card that I'm making, I'm going to use this second die from the set, and I'm going to cut out this entire piece. And you'll notice if I bring back the card, I'm going to use part of it behind the designer series paper at the top and part of it behind the designer series paper at the bottom. If you have a die like this or another one that's about the same size, if you position it, you can actually get two cuts out of that one piece of cardstock. So you could get two of these that would be ready for two cards for you to make. So I went ahead and I cut out this multi-foliage piece. It's so cool because it has almost a little embossing in addition to being a die cut. It's just really, really pretty. And we are going to actually cut that in half in just a minute, trim it so that we can use it on the top and on the bottom. So far, the two dies from the set that I have used are these two. And we have the foliage all ready to go for the card. I mentioned that we're going to use two other dies in this project. We're going to use the one that looks like the top of a piece of paper that's been torn out of a notebook. And then we're going to use the one that gives you kind of the jagged torn edge at the bottom. So the first piece that we're going to cut is the designer series paper. A couple of tips that I would give you in using this die, and it's going to sound kind of strange, but I'm going to say it anyway. When you use this die, make sure that you have it the right side up. When you flip it over, I've almost done this. I've almost laid it down the wrong way. So just make sure that the perforation is at the bottom. And when you attach this, when you put it right over your paper, my advice, and this is kind of hard to see on camera, is that you get the die really close to the edge, the top edge of the paper that you're going to die cut. And if you get it just close enough, you're going to be pretty assured that that cut is going to be nice and straight. And when you do that, because again, I have prepped quite a bit of this, ignore the bottom for a moment. This is what you're going to end up with. It's just super, super fun. And if I bring that up, you're going to see the perforation and even some of the little pieces that look like they're torn are not the same shape. So really, really fun. And then obviously on the bottom of that piece, I used this die and I just positioned it where I wanted that torn edge to look, and I die cut that out. So very, very easy. So that's the first time that we're going to use these two dies. And once you've used these, I think you're going to find that they are incredibly, incredibly fun. I have this design in my head, and I haven't really played around with this quite yet, but bear with me for a minute, because here's the piece that I cut out. And I'm thinking that there's got to be a way to do a zipper, some kind of fun zipper something. You know, you could have it so maybe a sweater, a jacket, something like that is partially opened and something underneath. I haven't figured it out yet, but I'm going to. And when I do, I will share it with you, because when you take the pieces out, you've got a zipper, and now you can figure out what you want to do. All right, 2 more pieces, and then we'll put everything together. So when we looked at the pieces of paper that we needed to do the project, you'll remember that there are 2 strips that are 1.5 inches wide. One of those is a piece of fresh freesia, and it is cut 1.5 inches wide. It really doesn't matter on the length. It's going to be just a piece of scrap. And what I did, which is no surprise, let me bring back the example, and you'll see exactly what I did. The same thing as I did on the designer series paper. So I put my die right up at the top. This is the one that does the torn from a notebook. I put that through my die cutting machine. And then I took the torn edge, and I decided I wanted to have a little bit of a different edge. So I made sure that I didn't use the same part of the die. And I just brought it over and pulled that through my die cutting machine. And again, through the miracle of YouTube and Zoom, we already have that piece. So again, just using these 2 dies. Then the last piece that I put together, I did use one of the stamps that is in the stamp set. There's some really nice sentiments in here. Hello is the one I'm going to use today. And you're a great friend. Thank you. And then those of you who know me well know I love grunge. So this is a super fun grunge stamp down at the bottom. And for the sentiment, I just pulled out my fresh freesia ink, grabbed a block, put that hello stamp on the block, made sure I inked it up pretty well, and I just stamped hello 3 times. I'm purposely holding that down and just pushing on all sides of that sentiment just to make sure that I get a really full image. And I'm just doing this a little arbitrary, so it doesn't look like I'm repeating in exactly the same orientation. And then I'll do one more. And I just think this is super fun. It's just a little different, a little kind of shabby chic. And there I have my sentiment. And I could very easily, if I wanted to use the same piece for another card, just turn it, stamp again, and then I will be able to die cut the 2. You know where we're going on this. We're going to do the exact same thing, use this die on the top, and then figure out where we want to cut that torn edge. And try to move this die around so your torn edge isn't always looking the same. And again, through magic, we end up with a piece that looks like that. So prepping for this card is not difficult. It definitely doesn't take a lot of time. And it could very easily be one that if you wanted to, you could put enough pieces together in an assembly kind of way so that you have multiples ready to go. So now that we have our pieces, and these are all the pieces that I just put together, we're going to go ahead and assemble the card. And the first thing that I suggest that you do is add the frame with the die cut to the front of your card. And I'm just going to use some liquid glue to do that. This is also a design that, as always, is very adaptable to different die cut or die sets, to different stamps. I bet your mind is swirling as far as designer series paper that you can use. And I should remind everybody that we are in June of 2023 right now, and Stampin' Up! Has a designer series paper sale that is going on through the end of this month. There are 13 different designer series paper collections that are part of the sale, and they are 15% off. And yes, the Masterfully Made paper is one of those 13. So I have grabbed some more because I am obsessed. I admit it. Okay, the next thing that I suggest that you do is add whatever die cuts you have that are going to go behind your designer series paper. And we've got some tucked on the top and on the bottom. You're going to notice they are not glued down. They're really very free to move around. I really wanted it to look like that. And I'm going to do both the top and the bottom with this piece. I'm going to grab my snips, and if you follow that main stem, you can see that if you cut, so I'm just going to surgically remove half of this little guy so that I can use pieces on the top and on the bottom. There's no real right way or wrong way to do this. I just grabbed kind of the center and I just cut it in half. And then I'm going to bring my in production piece back, and I'm going to dry fit these. And what I mean by that is before I commit to where I'm going to put these, I'm bringing in that designer series paper that I'm going to use, because I want to make sure that enough of the top and the bottom is going to show when I get everything together. And I'm not going to actually use any super fantastic kind of adhesive for this. I'm simply going to use Scotch tape. And the reason is when I add this designer series paper, it's going to go over the edges and I'll have glue on the back. So that's going to hold this down. But I want to kind of dry fit, and dry fit, if you're not familiar with that term, means that you're kind of playing around. You're really experimenting to see where you want the pieces. And a nice thing about tape, and I'm not going to really push that down, I'm just lightly placing that, is I can still move that if I want to. And I'm just kind of peeking and thinking, yeah, that looks pretty okay. And then I also want to make sure that when I put things on, that, for example, this little itty bitty stem down here, right at the tip of my scissors, that nobody's going to be able to see that. So I'm just going to, again, kind of look at this and say, yep, I'm good. And enough of that foliage is sticking out at the bottom. So I'll just hold that down, grab one more little piece of tape. And when I put the tape on, I'm making sure that on the top, that tape is down far enough that you're not going to see it. And on the bottom, it's up high enough that you're not going to see it when I glue down the designer series paper. Cool. That looks like it's going to work. And then I will go ahead and add the designer series paper to the front. This definitely, this being the Masterfully Made designer series paper collection, the first cut, you just want to hold your breath and say, I can do this, I can do this, I can do this. But once you have created a project with this paper, I'm not going to say you're going to, grab your paper trimmer and just start going nuts, but you feel more comfortable because you know how beautiful the projects are. Now you're going to notice that I intentionally cut this piece, this designer series paper, at 4 inches in width. And remember that the frame is 4 inches wide. It's 4 by 5¼ Notice that the designer series paper intentionally goes from one side to the other. It's also a great cheat because that's going to help you get that so it looks like it's nice and purposely put down. And I'm just going to give that a good little burnish with my fingers. All right, so we're making good progress. The next thing we're going to tackle is the second piece of foliage and also the sentiment. And we're going to do some dry fitting again. Now, let me show you one thing. When you cut your designer series paper, and those happen to be the same, if you look left and right, it's really the same. All the flowers are in the same place. But let me find one. Here's a good example. No, that's not what I want. This is a good example. Let's look at the one on the right versus the one on the left. Before you commit to where you're going to put your foliage and your sentiment, look at the design in the paper. I purposely, when I put this together, I wanted this rose to end up showing. So I purposely put my sentiment on the right. If I were using this piece, I probably would put the sentiment on the left, and I would have this foliage coming down from the top left. So take a look and see how you want to do that before you figure out, okay, how am I going to put my second die cut piece and the sentiment, because there are options. But I'm going to do what I did before because I do have this really pretty rose. In fact, this is kind of a hard choice, but since I've got the rose on left and right, but I'm going to go with the one to show the one on the left. And again, I'm going to do a dry fit. And I'm just going to bring these pieces in and sort of play around with them and see, where do I want these to go? How do I want them to look? And just make sure that everything is the way you want it to be. And if you're super particular and you don't think that you're going to remember exactly, a really good cheat is to get your phone and snap a picture. And then you'll have a, this is what I really liked, and then you can mimic it if you want. But I think I'm good with that. I like this coming off the edge. I like that being a little wonky. So I'm just going to take these 2 pieces off. And again, I'm going to dry fit this guy, the big foliage die cut. And I'm just going to put a piece of tape. I am going to glue part of this down. And that tape will be hidden by the 2 piece that we're going to do for the sentiment. So that's fine. And that's nice and in place. And it's also great because it's going to hold while I put on 2 little spots of glue. I mentioned that I don't want this, the foliage to be glued down. I want it to be really free, but I do want it to stay. So I'm going to put behind on the back, I'm going to put a little glue here and a little teeny glue here. And because I have that piece of tape, I now have an extra hand and I can just lift up that die cut and I'm just going to put a tiny, tiny bit of glue on each of those places. And it's just going to make sure that that will stay where I want it to. And then I'll just pop that down, hold that down for just a second, and that's not going to go anywhere. And I can even bend this up a little bit if I want to. Then for the sentiment, for me, this is meant to just be wonky. I love the word wonky. It sounds wonky. It's fun to say. And I do want it to look wonky. So I'm playing around with that. I'm figuring out, how do I want that to look? And kind of like it. Well, let's see. I think I like it more like that. I like it a little bit more like that because then the fresh freesia is going to pop against the white, against that white card base. So it's going to show it off a little bit more. And if I sort of hold these together, don't get crazy. It really won't matter. I'm just going to put a little bit of glue in the back, and then I'm going to kind of glue those together. And I will have them in the orientation that I like. Now you could just as easily put a glue dot behind there if you wanted, whatever it takes to get those in the state that you want them to be. As far as overlapping, you'll be all good. All right. We have a couple more quick things to do, and then this card will be all done. And the first one is that we need to get some of the twine tied around. This is actually linen thread. It is one of my favorites. And to me, if you have something that looks very natural with foliage, I think a very natural, organic kind of trim is really fun, and it makes it look a little bit more authentic. And what I'm simply going to do is I'm going to take that linen thread and again, use this super technical tool of Scotch tape. And I'm just going to tape the back, start it around the back, and put in a couple of lines. I think I'm going to end up with probably 3, like odd numbers when I'm doing something like this. Pull them together, make sure they're nice and tight. And then I'm going to go ahead and just tape that on, use my snips, and snip that right off. And I'm going to go ahead and adhere this. And you do have options. If you want to use dimensionals, go for it. I'm going to put this straight down. I'm going to add some Tombow right to the back. And I'm not worried that in the middle with that linen thread, it might look like it's buckled a little bit. That's perfectly fine. We've got a lot of dimension on this card. So I'm just going to go ahead and place that down. And I'm not being super picky about whether it's straight. It doesn't matter. Just going to hold that down and let it set for a second. And then we will deal with the bow and get that together. So just holding that down until that glue is nice and set. And it looks like it is. And then I just want a little bow. And for that, I'm running this through my fingernails to try and straighten it out just a tad. I'm actually going to tuck that linen thread up underneath. This is where you just sing songs and hum and don't get crazy. And it's not cooperating, but it will. Sometimes if you double it up, it can be easier. Yep, like that. And I am just going to tie a bow. And nothing special. Freehand bow tying is definitely not something that I would call myself even remotely good at, but we're going to give it a shot. So I'm just going to tie that, and then I'm going to pull my edges back to try to get them to look a little bit more like a bow. I will snip that off, and then I'm going to convince the thread that it needs to be a little bit more vertical. And again, just kind of give it a little trim, and it's going to look different than the other one that I made. And then the last bit to go on this card are the absolutely gorgeous brushed brass butterflies. If you can say that quickly 3-5 times, good for you. I definitely cannot. There's something about the alliteration in the title that sort of gets me. But I thought these butterflies added to the whole garden look, and they're just they're just gorgeous. They also are great because they don't add bulk. They're flat. So if you're concerned about putting them in an envelope and sticking them in the mail, don't be. They're not going to add any kind of bulk to the card. And I'm just going to be a little whimsical on these. That looks good. And again, I'm doing those in thirds. So let's take a look. This is the card on the right is the one that we made. And you're going to see up here, I might add just a touch of glue. I like that that's coming in front of where that paper is torn. That gives it just a little more character. So I may go back in and put just a little bit of glue to hold that. But let's take a look. The card on the right is the one that we just did. The card on the left is the example that I had shown. For all intent and purpose, they're pretty darn similar. Obviously, they're never going to be the same. The designer series paper is a little different. The way that I did the die cuts is a little different, and the bow is definitely different. But a very quick idea. Now, I want to show you one more. And I mentioned, let me bring back in the designer series paper. I mentioned that when I cut this paper, I cut 4 inches from the bottom, 4 inches from the top, and then you can get 3. So you can get 3 that are 4x4 from the top, 3 that are 4x4 from the bottom. And then I thought, oh my word, okay. Well, when you do that, you're going to have kind of, if you envision between my hands, you've got some funky stuff left until you turn it over. And then you have this gorgeous designer series paper. Being monochromatic, this side, I thought, let me make a monochromatic card using the same layout. And this is what I came up with. So it's the same thing. It's exactly the same, where, you know, you can see if I put these side by side, the exact same elements, but look at how different that looks. And you can play around. I really invite you to play around with this design, with different colors, with different papers. You're going to find that the combinations that you create are just going to be so fun. And I'm not sure which one I like better. And you're going to see here, I decided to put some silver in here rather than the linen thread. I thought the silver really popped. And this is the peacock, the pretty peacock. And then this is Lost Lagoon, which is another one of the returning colors. So this is a little bit of an homage to a couple of the returning colors that we have. But give it a try. Give it a try and look at the paper if you haven't. And make sure if you love it, which I think you will. If you don't, we need to talk. But if you love it, grab some while it's on sale, because it's definitely worth it. And you're just going to have so much fun. So until next time, I hope you try these. And if you do, I would really, really love to see what you make. So inky hugs.